Everyone wants to know whether JD's gonna run for office.
Who's everyone?
Everyone. Everyone. Trust me. I speak to them.
Okay.
What do you think? Should he run for office?
I think someday, if the time is right, and if he really feels that that's the best way that he can contribute to his home, then I think that would be a great idea.
I'm very flattered when people ask me, and you never say never, but it's just not something that I think about doing right now.
They learned reading, writing, around 23.
J.D. Vance did not always enjoy the level of academic and commercial success that he is recognized for today.
J.D. Vance.
JD Vance.
For J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance.
Growing up in the industrial Rust Belt town of Middletown, Ohio, and Appalachian Jackson, Kentucky, J.D. was accustomed to a much different life. Like many of his neighbors in these white working-class towns, his upbringing was tumultuous and characterized by financial troubles, unstable home environments, and abuse. Maslow's hierarchy of needs outlines human motivation and differentiates between deficiency and growth needs. According to his theory, all individuals must fulfill their deficiency needs, including physiological, safety, and social needs, before we can develop our self-esteem and become self-actualized. JD, like so many other impoverished children, struggled to fulfill his deficiency needs. He seemed unlikely to finish high school and certain to fall victim to the cycle of poverty. But, against all odds, JD managed to overcome his disadvantage. He describes his journey and those who helped him along the way in his best-selling book, Hillbilly Elegy, a memoir of a family and culture in crisis.
J.D. Vance has written Hillbilly Elegy, a memoir of his upbringing in the Rust Belt heartland.
Our Hillbilly Elegy. It's the story of his white working-class family struggles, his mother's endless cycle of drug abuse, and how he managed to overcome it.
This book is many things, Hillbilly Elegy, but I think among all else, it's a personal story.
Hillbilly Elegy experienced widespread success as it provided a window into an often misunderstood population. Self-described as 70% memoir and 30% social commentary, Vance acts as a cultural intermediary as he contextualizes the issues that plagued Middle America by counting his own childhood stories.
So the book is really a very focused view of what it's like to grow up white working class in America, specifically with a Scots-Irish background. And so my grandparents went from Kentucky to Southern Ohio, had a lot of optimism about their lives and their future, but as I write in the book, that optimism didn't necessarily pan out. So we've been in some cases a family that's experienced a fair amount of downward mobility, but also obviously in my case a lot of upward mobility because I eventually went on to the Marines and then to Yale Law School. So it's really an exploration at a very personal level of why there aren't more kids who are living lives like I've been able to live.
Many of the barriers preventing disadvantaged children from becoming upwardly mobile are rooted in early childhood. Adverse childhood experiences are potentially traumatic events that have negative, long-lasting effects on health and well-being.
One of the ways that we think these function or how they work is that they reshape how the brain functions, that it dramatically shapes how the brain processes particularly emotional stimuli. And it shapes the way the brain works in such a way so that these children are then much more vulnerable to stress. They're much less resilient, largely because they're just not as capable of regulating their feelings and regulating their behaviors. That is one of the things that I study, and we know that that impacts pretty much every other aspect of development there is.
Potentially traumatic events are common among U.S. children and include a wide range of physical and emotional experiences.
Study by the Wisconsin Children's Trust Fund found that 40% of low-income kids face multiple instances of childhood trauma, compared to only 29% for upper-income kids. And think about what that really means. If you're a low-income kid, almost half of you face multiple instances of childhood trauma. This is not an isolated problem. This is a very significant issue. We know what happens to the kids who experience that life. They're more likely to do drugs, more likely to go to jail, more likely to drop out of high school. And most importantly, they're more likely to do to their children what their parents did to them. This trauma, this chaos in the home is our culture's very worst gift to our children, and it's a gift that keeps on giving.
Research also links adverse childhood experiences to the opioid epidemic. These traumatic events increase an individual's risk of engaging in drug use as an adult, and living in a home where drug use is prevalent increases children's exposure to ACEs.
I mean, I would say that being in a home with an individual, a parent, a caregiver suffering from the opioid epidemic will contribute to ACEs. Of course, we need to both treat and help individuals suffering from an opioid addiction. We also need to then think about their children. I've been thinking and talking a lot about this lately, that there's going to be this secondary epidemic of children whose parents and caregivers are suffering through the opioid epidemic right now.
This is really the first wave, because what happened is we lost hundreds of people in Middletown to opiate deaths over the last 2 or 3 years. And what happened is now you've got an entire wave of children who are either being raised by the other parent or their grandparent, or in some cases foster parents because both parents died. This is the first wave, is us dealing with the traffickers and the addicts. We have an entire wave of grandparents and parents and foster kids and everything that haven't even hit yet. There's a whole other wave coming that we simply haven't even thought about yet.
Growing up in Middletown, JD and his sister Lindsay were exposed to multiple adverse childhood experiences. Adverse childhood experiences are all too common among children in Middletown and Jackson. JD's mama and papa were born and raised in Jackson, Kentucky, a small working-class town in the heart of southeastern Kentucky coal country. JD spent his summers in Jackson and came to consider the town as his true home and a refuge from the assisted problems in Ohio. Despite the beauty of the mountains that surrounded him, JD came to understand the deep troubles that continue to plague the town and, as JD refers to them, its hill people population.
What are the primary issues in Jackson?
Jackson is like a lot of communities in eastern Kentucky. We are facing several fairly serious issues. One of those, probably our primary issue, is prescription drug abuse and drug abuse in general. That is one of the major issues that is facing almost every community, not just in Kentucky, but around the world in a lot of ways. But we are also the product of what I would call our own isolation.
100 years ago, the pioneers pushed west. But here in these mountains, some of them stayed, hemmed in by the mountains, cut off from the changing world outside.
For years, eastern Kentucky was so isolated, and part of that was because of the terrain. A part of that was because of the distance and the difficulty of crossing rivers and hills and those kind of things. But by the time the 20th century rolls around, we really begin to self-isolate. And we are the product now of that self-isolation because we were not part of a lot of the changes that were going on in society with infrastructure, with switching from a natural resource-based economy to other industries. So we basically created our own situation in a lot of ways.
Well, I think partially you saw it when you visited Eastern Kentucky, is that the economy in this area has been really hard hit. You know, these are areas that depended on coal mines, on steel mills, on a lot of other manufacturing industries that just don't exist anymore, or at least don't exist in quite the volume needed to support a local economy.
We are a culture based for much of our existence upon natural resources, which have a tendency to boom or bust. So when we are in a period of boom, people come to this area because there are jobs, there are opportunities, there's a chance to make a great deal of money and to make it very quickly with a lot of hard work. And then as the economic winds change and there's a downturn, people leave.
Like millions of others, JD's grandparents migrated north in the 1940s in pursuit of work and landed in industrial Middletown, Ohio. His grandfather took a job at Armco Steel, the city's largest employer. Mama and Papa relocated to Middletown in search of a better life, but in many ways they never fully escaped the poverty and accompanying social ills they left behind. As Middletown's industrial boom turned to bust in the 1970s and 80s, jobs began to disappear and the Midwest transplants were again trapped in towns that could no longer support its workforce. Today, Middletown continues to struggle with problems with employment, poverty, housing, and education. As JD described, today Middletown is little more than a relic of American industrial glory. Abandoned shops with broken windows line the downtown where Central Avenue and Main Street meet.
What are some of the challenges that you are facing today?
The biggest challenge is that the resources are vastly outweighed by the needs. In this community in particular, we saw from 1990 to 2000 a doubling almost of the poverty rate. We saw social services that assist families stretch to their limits because of those increases in poverty rate. Our community for the past 20, 30 years has had a school system that unfortunately scores toward the bottom of the state of Ohio. Out of about 650 school districts statewide, we usually on most measurements rank 590th, 595th. And when you have that type of school system, you don't have residents knocking down your door wanting to move here.
Every institution, every school system, or every school is going through changes in our country. And what are some of the challenges that you are facing at Middletown High School?
Well, I think some of the challenges are challenges that our community faces. We have moved from, I've been in this district for 26 years, and when I first came here, our poverty rate was roughly about 35%. Now it's close to 80%. So it's a much different clientele of children that we're serving, and different kinds of risk factors that they undergo. We also have, of course, the drug problem in southwestern Ohio, and we're not, our heads aren't in the sand over that. We have those issues, and our kids come out of homes that have those issues and challenges. And with all of that comes a crime element, and we have those issues in town, and our children grow up in that.
Yeah, the heroin crisis and opioid crisis has hit us pretty hard. We've seen a number of overdoses, a number of deaths, and it's been increasing for the last probably 2 or 3 years.
We've had about 8 heroin summits, and I started it about 2 years ago. I pulled the entire community together, and I invited everybody. What can we do as a community? Where can we make a difference? And the answer has been, we have made a difference, but the problem has grown faster than our results have.
Mama and Papa's move to Middletown was motivated by their strong belief in the American dream. And although they never lost hope in this ideal, their working class neighbors began to believe this dream of progress was not made for them. As their hopes for the future faded, as did their prospects for upward mobility.
So upward mobility is an abstract term, but it strikes at something that's very core at the heart of the American dream. It's the sense, and it measures whether kids like me who grow up in poor communities are going to live a better life, whether they're going to have a chance to live a materially better existence, or whether they're going to stay in the circumstances where they came from. And one of the things we've learned, unfortunately, is that upward mobility isn't as high as we'd like it to be in this country. And interestingly, it's very geographically distributed. So, take Utah, for instance. In Utah, a poor kid is actually doing okay, very likely to live their share and their part in the American dream. But if you think of where I'm from, in the South, in Appalachia, in Southern Ohio, it's very unlikely that kids like that will rise. The American dream in those parts of the country is, in a very real sense, just a dream.
Why is this decline in upward mobility happening? And what are the causes of this decline? Among the various causes are the adverse childhood experiences that have long-lasting negative health and social impacts, economic and structural barriers, the brain drain, and failing schools. But greatest yet is the sense of hopelessness that arises from these circumstances.
So for starters, there was a very real sense of hopelessness in the community that I grew up in. There was a sense that kids had that their choices didn't matter. No matter what happened, no matter how hard they worked, no matter how hard they tried to get ahead, nothing good would happen. So that's a tough feeling to grow up around. That's a tough mindset to penetrate.
What has changed in Jackson is the outlook of the people. We came out of generations of people who believed that anything was possible. Anything was possible with cooperation, with hard work, and a little bit of effort. And along comes a generation who no longer thought that anything was possible. There was this idea, this defeatist attitude that crept into the psyche of Eastern Kentucky because everything we tried failed. So this defeatist idea creeps in and it takes hold. And anytime you have a defeatist attitude, you don't believe you can improve, so why try? And that is not just an Eastern Kentucky idea. That is a national idea in a lot of places.
Another obstacle to opportunity in these communities is their low social capital. JD understands that social capital has important economic value. As he describes, the networks of people and institutions around us connect us to the right people, ensure we have opportunity, and impart valuable information. Without them, he says, we're going it alone. Despite his challenging childhood and his apparent information gap, Vance had social capital. His social capital connected him to valuable social relationships and social networks through which he accessed social support. Social support is support accessible to an individual through social ties to other individuals, groups, and the larger community. The social support JD derived from his networks over time gave him hope for the future and provided him with opportunities for upward mobility.
When you take a look, there's a really great resource out there called 40 Developmental Assets. And basically what it says is that you're looking for what kind of resilience a student has. What do they draw on? Do they have people in their lives that care for them, that they care for? Do they have a connection to school? Do they have a connection to some sort of a belief system? Do they have do they have enough money? Do they have shelter? You know, all of those kinds of things. And the more assets that a student has, the more ability they have to be able to address risks in their lives.
J.D. Vance talked about quite a bit. He's one of the kids who said, you know, I don't have any hope. Somehow, somebody gave him hope.
JD was one of those who left. He had the support of people who loved him and helped him to go in the direction that he needed to do.
Scholars identify 4 types of social support, each of which played an important role in JD's life and success. JD beat the statistics because he received social support at each stage in his life, from the Marines, his community, mentors and teachers, and most importantly, his family. Throughout the book, he speaks about the many different ways his family put their thumb on his scale. His grandparents, particularly his mama, helped him build resilience to the risk factors surrounding him and to unlearn the helplessness that permeated their community.
I mean, you know, people often ask, how did you not succumb to a lot of the influences that were going on in your neighborhood? And I always say, it's because of Mamaw, right? I mean, I remember the first time that I ever smoked pot, I was hanging out with one of the bad kids in the neighborhood, and Mamaw told me, look, if you don't stop hanging out with that kid, I'm gonna run him over with my car, and no one's ever gonna find out. Right? and I don't think she would have actually ran somebody over with her car, but I thought that she might, so I stopped hanging out with the kid and I didn't do any more drugs. And I think that, you know, the person who deserves the most credit is certainly Mamaw. You know, she was stubborn in the face of disadvantage that even I have really no appreciation for. Stubborn about the idea that any individual could make something of themselves, that, you know, you could look and stare disadvantage in the face, you could recognize that your life wasn't fair relative to other people's, but she was really, really insistent that I not completely give up on myself. Yes, accept that life is unfair, but even still, don't give up on yourself.
Mamaw showed JD that despite the unfairness and difficulties in his life, he had the innate ability to overcome his disadvantage. She showed him that education was a path out of poverty, and when his grades began to slip due to the conflict that arose from living with his mother, she provided him with a stable home. After leaving Mamaw's house, JD enlisted in the Marines. His time in the Marines helped him close the information gap that had grown since his childhood and learn the soft skills that many adults he grew up around lacked, skills that would help him navigate the world.
The other thing that really helped was the United States Marine Corps. So we think of the Marine Corps as a military outfit, and of course it is. But for me, the U.S. Marine Corps was a 4-year crash course in character education. Taught me how to make a bed, how to do laundry, how to wake up early, how to manage my finances. These are things my community didn't teach me.
The Marines also reinforced Mamaw's message to JD that he had control over his own story. They showed him that through hard work, he was capable of anything.
And for a kid who'd grown up in a community that was starting to lose faith in that American dream, I think that the military was a really useful way to, as I say in the book, teach a certain amount of willfulness as opposed to despair and hopelessness.
After JD returned home from the Marines, he turned back to his community for the instrumental support he needed to attend classes at Ohio State University.
In 2007, 2008, he had just returned from the Marines. They actually had raised a large sum of money to establish a physical veterans memorial in our city cemetery. And they raised more money than they needed, so they had money left over. And he had just finished his term with the Marines and came back home and applied for it. And he was our very first Veterans Memorial Scholarship recipient. And he completed his degree at Ohio State in 2 years and received the scholarship both of those years.
When he entered Yale Law School, JD again found himself in a new environment with foreign rules and expectations. He depended on his mentors and peers to fill this information gap and the social capital he derived from these networks to find jobs and other opportunities.
There's an important point to be made about social capital. And what I mean here is the value that people derive from their information networks, from the people who are in their lives. If you think about what it's like to apply for a job when you come from a place like Yale, very often it involves giving a career services officer or giving a friend or maybe even a parent a resume and saying, could you pass this on to somebody who might be able to give me a job or at least an interview? That's a world that I first encountered here at Yale, but I had never seen it operate outside of this institution.
JD was able to become upwardly mobile largely because of the social support he received throughout his life. But for most poor kids, the American dream is still out of reach.
How many of those students are similar to J.D. Vance?
That's a great question. And I would have to say, I'd have to back up by starting and saying that his book has all of the risk factors represented one place or another in a character.
You're absolutely right.
And everybody doesn't have all the risk factors. However, most of my population have multiples. I wouldn't say one, but I would say multiples.
I had a lot of good fortune in the mentors and people who have played an important role in my life, from the Marines, from Ohio State, from Yale, from other places. People have really stepped in and ensured that they filled that social capital gap that it was pretty obvious apparently that I had. That comes from good fortune. But a lot of children aren't going to have that good fortune. And I think that raises really important questions for all of us about how we're going to change that. We need to ask questions about how we're going to give low-income kids who come from a broken home access to a loving home. We need to ask questions about how we're going to teach low-income parents how to better interact with their children, with their partners. We need to ask questions about how we give social capital, mentorship to low-income kids who don't have it. We need to think about how we teach working-class children about not just hard skills like reading, mathematics, but also soft skills like conflict resolution and financial management.
JD recognizes the value of social capital in his life and emphasizes the necessity of developing it in the lives of other disadvantaged children. To make JD's story of success a common one, communities can build comprehensive social support systems that surround disadvantaged children with the kinds of social support JD received. These community-based solutions, by increasing social capital, connect children and families to networks of holistic services and supports that address multiple risk factors. As JD said, without social capital and support, children are going it alone. Comprehensive social support systems connect these children to organizations, agencies, and mentors who can provide them with opportunity.
It takes one positive adult in a child's life to make the difference. Now, it may not always be their parent, it could be a neighbor, it could be a fourth grade, for me, it was a fourth grade teacher, I think, sent me on a different path. So, I mean, it's really having adults starting to understand the trauma that's happening in kids' lives. Because I think that is really confusing for a lot of adults who don't understand that, whether it's the teacher or the Sunday school teacher or whoever, helping the adults in our lives understand what trauma means so that they can be now understanding instead of just saying that's a bad kid, because that's what it looks like.
When we think about disadvantage in this country, we very often want to think that there's a magic bullet or that anybody, no matter how disadvantaged their circumstances are, they can just make it through sheer hard work and determination. And I think a better framing is that these social and environmental factors are really powerful. And if you want to give more kids like me more opportunities, you ought to think about how to place people like Mamaw or people like the mentors that I had, how to place them in front of more kids' pathways.
The one thing that I believe could really make a difference, there is not a foundation, there's not a board, there's not a group that is currently doing any type of mentoring. The one-on-one time with someone to say, I care about you and I want to help you. They're missing some of that in a lot of our lives here in Eastern Kentucky.
Comprehensive social support systems can utilize technology to better identify existing community resources and expertise. Technology will also facilitate communication among service providers to enhance service integration and increase the speed and efficiency of service delivery.
When it comes to technology, technology is received in households relatively quick. The reason why is that a majority of those individuals cannot afford cable and Wi-Fi, but they do have their cell phones, all right? And because they do have their cell phones, they can get to information relatively quickly through social media. That's the one interesting thing about poverty, is that technology is another way that is another tool that's being used to stave off just an epidemic of poverty.
And you know, one of the things that technology could do is make communication so much easier. I feel like digital interface is inevitable for kids who need to be employable. Our kids, you know, they all have smartphones. You may not have food or shoes that fit, but you have a smartphone. And they have to. I mean, that's social survival, you know, in their world. And one of the things we wish we could do a better job of is, for instance, updating and keeping them all in communication with their mentors and tutors and teachers in a way where people have their privacy, but they can exchange information. There's so many services available, but our families who deeply need them can't access them because they don't have the digital interface. And people think they do, and they don't.
Technology can be utilized to enable comprehensive social support in various ways. Morgantown, West Virginia, home to the University of West Virginia, suffers from many of the same challenges as Jackson and Middletown. To respond to these challenges, the university's Center for Service and Learning promotes a culture of service and civic engagement among their students.
We're a very poor state in West Virginia, and locally we have most of our schools that are schools that have free and reduced lunch. We give out over 1,500 bags every Friday to kids for weekend meals at school programs once school is in. So just in that simple knowledge, our students are sometimes shocked by that, because they're like, you know, how do we have that many kids? They see campus, right? Campus is vibrant. We have lots of great buildings. We have a lot wonderful stuff. But if you take a few more blocks further than campus, you start to see that reality. So when I tell them in class, you know, we're giving out to, you know, sometimes 3/4 of the kids in a school take a backpack of food home on Friday just so that they have meals on Saturday and Sunday. That makes them start to think, where am I really? Where is this community? And am I really seeing this from the right perspective? And maybe I do need to do some of that service just to step outside of my zone for a minute.
So I got involved with service learning when I first came to West Virginia University because I think that one thing that our university does well is we promote service. As I said, not only as something that we do, but as a way of life. It's something that mountaineers do. It's something that we as a university take pride in. And we've really been successful in that regard of making sure that people are introduced not only to our academic components of our university, but to our service components as well.
To promote student involvement, the Center for Service and Learning uses their innovative iServe system as a recruiting and service management tool.
So we get students involved through a number of ways. First of all, you know, some majors require service. The community partner posts an opportunity, or we call it a need, and then the students will go browse all the different needs, and as soon as they find a need that, you know, fits their schedule, fits their interests, they'll basically respond to the need, and then that places them within that opportunity.
Today, Jackson and Middletown are focusing on promoting upward mobility. They are investing in their youth by creating more local opportunities and preparing students to take advantage of them. Kelsey Sebastian is creating jobs and building social capital in Jackson. Her restaurant provides opportunities for young people to stay and invest in their town while also learning valuable skills that will prepare them for the future.
You're from Jackson.
Yes, born and raised.
And you went to school. Where did you go to school?
I went to the University of Kentucky, majored in hospitality and tourism, and have a minor in business.
And then after you graduated, you came here, or?
I worked for another year there in Lexington and then moved back home after that. And, you know, there are people that were in my class in college who live in Las Vegas and people who work for Disney and on cruise ships and all this kind of thing. So I kind of took a different route. But I definitely wanted to bring something back to this area. So we employ, you know, depending on the time of year, anywhere from 10 to 15 people. So you're providing jobs for other people as well as services for the people in the community.
Do you believe you can be a mentor?
Possibly. I think as far as, you know, we might not have kids who want to do exactly what I'm doing, but as they might want to start their own business and see how that goes. So, you know, as far as business plan and hiring workers and management style and that kind of thing, I think that would carry over into a lot of different businesses, not just this particular one. You know, there are kids in this area who don't necessarily see that at home, and they would benefit from a mentorship program where people took time to invest in them, see what areas they're interested in, and seeing how you can help harness that.
When housing is an issue and meal is another issue, how do you think students can be motivated to do even better?
Well, I think there's an inherent idea of wanting to do more and do better. And like I said, Middletown's had this innovative spirit for a long time. We're doing a lot through the local chamber, through social service agencies, through churches, in terms of encouraging students and getting proactive in the schools to raise awareness of opportunities that are available.
Back before they're seniors, the idea is to, when you're a sophomore and you're trying to figure out what's next for you after high school, they're trying to get them to at least walk them through and say, not everybody's going to go to college, nor should they go to college, nor is that maybe the best path for everybody. And so here's other things you can do. The construction trade needs workers. The manufacturing trade needs workers. The hospital needs medical staff of all the way from janitors to surgeons. And here's things that you should be thinking about if you're not maybe college material. Here's a chance for you to make a living wage, doing really good work. You can stay here in the community, and we can walk you through those paths and get you the education and start setting you up even in high school to be prepared for those jobs.
At a recent community forum, Middletown leaders outlined new and continued strategies to improve health and mobility outcomes. They called for a greater focus on interventions that mitigate the powerful effects of adverse childhood experiences.
What's currently being done here in Middletown that you know of to really help these children that have experienced these, and what is a community that we can really come around and help them?
It's as easy as recognizing that trauma is in every family in the community, and you're trying to offset the trauma by supporting those kids, giving them those natural protective factors. So we're doing that. I know that superintendent is talking about training his staff on the ACEs. I know our community has opportunities at FCFC, the Family Children's First Council, that can educate people on ACEs. Everywhere I go, I talk about the ACEs. Understanding is called trauma-informed community. Understanding that we can battle it simply by putting forward developmental assets in every child's life that you come across.
At the Community Building Institute of Middletown, they are also investing in dual generational programs that address the whole child and the whole family.
We have a cradle to career continuum of programming, and so we start with serving families with children 0 through 5 with early education programs. We believe if we are to make an impact in Middletown that we need to provide holistic service, not just to the children, not just to the adults, but to the whole family.
Finally, leaders acknowledge the need for greater collaboration among community organizations and agencies to implement effective health promotion and poverty alleviation strategies.
We have a lot of good going on in Middletown. We really do. A lot of good social service agencies, much of are represented in here. What are we missing, and what could be a next step from that to continue to bring people out of poverty?
I think there are a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of expertise to tackle these problems, but we can't operate in silos. We have to find a way to work together.
JD talked about the value of mentors in his life and how they showed him what was available and what was possible. In this way, JD has also become a mentor to children growing up like he did.
You mentioned mentorship. I know JD spoke at the commencement of 2017, and you're proud of Tell me, how did that happen?
It was his message resounded with the kids and the community so beautifully this year. It's been a bit tough around in Middletown, and Middletown, I believe, is definitely on the upswing as a city. We've done some tremendous things as a city, but we have a long way to go. And I think that his message provides hope, and it provides he has given people a roadmap for how to move forward with this, and he has been generous of spirit to share the path he took and to let others learn from what he did. And I think that is the gift that he shares with us.
As JD wrote, public policy can help, but there's no government that can fix these problems for us. Today, Vance is putting his words into action. Since moving back to his home state of Ohio, he started a nonprofit to help tackle the problems he identified in Hillbilly Elegy. And as he leads by example, his words continue to inspire the next generation of children to beat the statistics.
The Ohio life he leads today is very different from the one he left behind. And with all the attention and recognition comes criticism. So one of your critics dismisses the tone of the book.
Sure.
Quote, all hillbillies need to do is work hard, maybe do a stint in the military, and they can end up at Yale Law, like he did.
I just don't think that's the thesis of the book at all. The takeaway of the book is that community and family really matter. And I think anybody who ignores that is fundamentally not appreciating the actual reality that exists on the ground and the complexity of the problems these kids face.
With modern technology, we have greater potential to give kids like JD a chance than ever before. JD is an anomaly. Most impoverished children will not benefit from organically formed social support systems and social capital as he did. Instead, we can leverage technology to build comprehensive social support systems capable of finding other JDs and help connect them to holistic services. By helping communities replicate JD's social support system, technology-enabled tools can replicate his story of self-actualization.
They learned reading, writing, Route 23 to jobs laid waiting in those city's factories. They didn't know that old highway lead them to a world of misery. Have you ever been down Kentucky way, say South Prestonsburg? Have you ever been up in Holler? Or have you ever heard mountain man cough his life away, digging that black coal in those dark mines, those dark mines? If you had, you might just understand the reason that they left it all behind. 'Cause they learned reading, writing, Route 23 to jobs laid away in those cities' factories. They learned reading, writing, roads to the north.